So, another thing I wanted to ask you about, because it's kind of a particular favorite of mine too, is underwater cryptids. And again,
I love my lake monsters.
me too. And my first experience with a possible cryptid was actually as a child out on the Waukegan Pier. I saw a shape under the water that did not move like a school of fish, and it didn't look like a big fish. It was 6 to 8 feet long, and it moved in almost a serpentine way through the water. And I was convinced at the time that it was a sea monster of some sort, or perhaps a giant shark or something. But as you get older, you get that logic filter that takes over, and you start to convince yourself, it was probably just a really big carp or two big carp swimming tail nose to tail,
Or sturgeon.
or what?
A sturgeon.
Yeah, it could have been. But it struck me very, very strongly as a child that, oh my gosh, we've got a monster in Lake Michigan. And of course, as I got older, I started to research it, and there were all these sightings of the Lake Michigan sea serpent and everything. And we did a podcast on it. And it turned out to be the single most controversial podcast that we ever did, because we had hundreds of posts from people saying, I've lived on Lake Michigan my whole life, and I've never seen any sea monster or anything weird like you're describing. This is made up. This is clickbait. Do you ever get that response when you talk about lake monsters?
No, because I focus on the historical report of lake monsters in the Great Lakes. And so Lake Michigan is primarily known for two giant turtle reports. The Stearns Bayou Monster and the Lake Leelanau Monster, which is actually, if you look up the report, there are real people attached to these reports that had the sighting, and they tell their story. And so Lake Michigan, people are not out on the water 24/7.
Mm-hmm.
Just like Superior, Lake Huron, Lake Ontario, Lake Erie. They might be moving across the water, but the great thing about lakes is, or oceans, or any big body of water is, just because you're at point A doesn't mean that the sea monster or fish or whatever can't be at point B, C, D, E through Z. You're one point on a moving body of water that has no locks or dams in it, that a creature can freely move from one side of the lake to the other side of the lake. And because our Great Lakes have such a depth, it could be 30 feet underneath the water and you would never know, not 30 feet, it could be 15 feet underneath the water and you'd never know.
Right.
Case in point, in Lake Erie, in modern times, like the 1950s, a all-metal ship, the Pierre Marquette No. 3, sank. Now, this ship was 2 stories high and the length of a football field. To this day, they still cannot find the ship.
I can believe it.
Lake Erie is the most shallowest body of, is the most shallowest of the Great Lakes, and they cannot find the ship. So if a stationary object, like a ship the length of a football field, can go undetected, then a free, moving organism can go anywhere it wants, and if people see it, it's by chance.
Right. Yeah, I think the analogy I used when we were talking about the podcast, I said that, I lived pretty close to the Chicago and the North Shore for all the 80s and 90s, and I never saw Michael Jordan in person. But
right.
I'm pretty convinced that he actually exists. And I certainly wouldn't take it upon myself to swear that he doesn't exist because I never saw him.
That's my analogy with moose. I've driven to Minnesota so many times, and I have never seen a moose. I haven't even seen a moose at a zoo. So I'm like, you know what? I think cryptids. They're this made-up animal that people claim to see in the north, and I think that they're making it up.
Mm-hmm. There you go, and that's the difference between a cryptid and a generally accepted animal. It's just who sees it and when.
I mean, there's reports of sharks in Lake Michigan, and it's like, well, no, because the only shark that could exist would be the bull shark,
Right.
and he's the only one who can swim in fresh water. But Lake Michigan's temperatures do not rise above like freezing temperatures until August. And the shark would have to be very close to shore for it to even stay thermally active.
Mm-hmm.
And the only way for that shark to get in would either be somebody dumped it on purpose into the lake, or it came up the Illinois River off of the Mississippi. And we know that's not possible because of the locks and dams that were put in place in the 1950s.
Right. Okay, so you just killed my theory that what I saw was actually a bull shark, which was one of the logic filters I applied.
It would depend on when you saw that. If it was before 1955, might be a possibility. After 1955, they put locks and gates and dams into the Illinois River because of the silver carp population that they were trying to stop from getting into the Great Lakes.
Okay. I didn't realize that. I had always used the theory that it could have come up through, the Illinois River by way of the Mississippi, and, that could have explained it. But now, knowing it makes logical sense with all the locks and dams in place, that wouldn't have happened. And I can't imagine somebody just catching a 6 or 8 foot bull shark just to bring it over and dump it in Lake Michigan. So
it could have been a dune of some kind of normal species of an animal.
Well, it was Waukegan, and they dump a lot of weird stuff in the water in Waukegan.
Yeah,
so.
Plenty of radiation probably around there.
Yeah. Now we do have reports of sturgeon being over 6 foot, long, and that's a possibility.
Yeah.
Sturgeon can grow to very incredible length in weight if they're left alone for long enough and they go undetected.
All right.
I have one more question, but it'll take a very big turn. So,
okay,
this past month, I have been seeing sort of a small resurgence in small cryptid that I've never heard of, but personally, and a couple people have been throwing this at me. Have you ever heard of the Chicago crab?
the Chicago crab.
The Chicago crab. It's just been a small existential crisis to me. Okay.
No, I have not heard. I do know that Chicago's fossil is the Tully monster, but like the biggest that got was like 10 inches.
They were like talking.
I have not heard of the Chicago crab.
Yeah.
Well, somebody mentioned it to us like a year ago, I think, and we did like a really quick internet search, and it looked like it was just a creepypasta thing. It was
right.
Just, but now it's been resurging.
A little bit. I mean, it's not like, anything near the same research size as any other cryptid. It's just like something that's been coming up every once in a while in my life. So I just have been asking a lot of people.
No, I have not heard of that one.
All right.
And that's not even really an aquatic creature, is it? Isn't it like seen on land?
It's seen on land.
Yeah.
No, I haven't heard of that one.
Okay. You are a believer in Mothman in general, though, right? Like in West Virginia?
I do believe that there's something out there, because everybody focuses on the Silver Bridge collapse as being the Mothman apex. What people don't realize is 2 years before that, farmers in the rural surrounding area of Point Pleasant were reporting to the authorities, hey, there's something out here. And it got so bad that a lot of families, like as soon as the sun started going down, would not let anybody leave the house because they were seeing what we now know as the Mothman. And their reports were ignored. it isn't until you have the famous case of the 4 teenagers in the car being chased down the road, and the Silver Bridge collapse and all that suddenly people are like, oh, hey, Mothman. When, in fact, there were reports 2 years before that.
Oh. And it didn't end with the Silver Bridge either, did it?
Because, once again, it disperses back out into the rural areas, and those people start reporting again. Hey, we're having, activity from this creature again, and their reports, are collected but mostly ignored. It was only the fringe reporters who had an interest in that kind of stuff that were really taking and making an effort to catalog all the different reports and eyewitness sightings.
Okay. Now, I've had a number of people give me logical explanations for Chicago Mothman sightings. There are people who say it could be a great blue heron, it could be a sandhill crane. I actually spoke to a police officer a few days ago who was telling me that he happens to love owls, and he says that in some of the overpasses in Chicago, there are these huge owls. He said one of them had a wingspan bigger than a car windshield, and I was thinking, boy, if I saw that at night, I would think it was Mothman. But if you take all of those natural things and then throw in that other possibility of a favorite Illinois cryptid, the Thunderbird, which likes to appear in central Illinois and downstate. If it exists, it could be creeping northward from time to time. It just makes me wonder if what we're seeing here, if in fact people are seeing anything, is just a whole lot of different phenomenon rather than one Mothman.
That's very, very possible. I tend to discount the sandhill crane because if you've ever been up close to a sandhill crane, their colors change with the season and they camouflage. And it's not until they're moving that you actually realize that they're there. And they're so, I call them alien birds because they are just so weird to look at. But they're very thin legged, thin beaked, thin bodied. So if 3 of them are moving across the yard and stop, and you drive by not knowing that they're there, it's not until they move that they actually catch your attention. They go from being like a dull brown in the wintertime, spring, to in summertime, they start taking on green and red and orange colors. So they're very good at camouflaging.
And even if you did see them like silhouetted against the moon or something, or silhouetted against a street light, their body gives a pretty thin profile, doesn't it?
It does, and they're very vocal about, we have sandhill cranes all over where I live in Michigan, and we've had them try to nest in our yard because we have quite a bit of acreage, but our German Shepherds weren't too cool with that. And when they launch themselves, they make this trumpeting, honking sound.
Okay.
And it's very loud. And it's like, okay. And it's a slow process for them to launch off the ground and take flight. So it's like, yeah, you're not Mothman.
Yeah, it's not the typical Mothman takeoff where the wings don't even move and he just shoots right up into the sky without a sound.
Right.
Okay. So let me ask you, now that you're not doing the magazines actively anymore, what are you working on? What can we expect from you in the future?
I am working on a couple of books. One on Detroit's legend of the Nain Rouge.
Oh.
He's a little guy that is just he's best known here in Detroit.
Similar to is he similar to like the gnomes of Wisconsin that we sometimes hear of, or is it more of a spiritual type being, or what?
Well, he's said to be a Native American spirit god that showed up here to battle Cadillac, and when Fort Detroit was actually being built. And there's like different theories, different ideas of Was he already here? Did he come with the French? There's so many different ideas. So I'm researching that. And then there's a couple other books that are just waiting off in the wind.
Cool. I know that feeling. I've got a stack of them that are kind of waiting off in the wings. I've yet to complete my first novel, even though I've written basically since I was 10 years old in one media or another. It's a daunting task, and then I envy you for having completed so many already. I was looking at your collection on Amazon, and I think I told you earlier, you've basically written on every topic I've ever wanted to read about.
Well, it is a daunting task. And like with the magazines, it felt like I had written, on everything and anything I could ever, want to write about. And then I'm sitting here going, I don't want to type another word. It's just like,
Yeah.
like telling myself, let's just take a little break.
Yeah, definitely need that every now and then to kind of mentally recharge. And I always go back to a line that I heard from a movie once. It was, there comes a time when you have to stop trying to write your own books and start reading other people's. and I think that's kind of where I'm at right now. I've finally rediscovered my love of reading, and I've been tearing through cryptid books lately, and I'm definitely adding yours to my stack. But I'm hoping that will spark my own creativity and get me back writing more again.
Well, I hear Ken Gerhardt has a good series out too.
Oh, cool. Yeah, he's another person we've always enjoyed. Whenever we've seen him on our various shows. The books that you have out now, best place to find them is still Amazon. Is that right?
Amazon is about the best place to find everything.
Okay. Yeah, I saw you've got your Squatch GQ is still up on Amazon. I'm definitely grabbing the issue with Russell Acord in it, and I'm being one of those people you talked about who just sees a picture of somebody famous and buys the magazine. But Russell is another of our favorites, so we've got to read more about him.
Russell's a pretty good guy. If you see him at a crypto event, just say hi to him.
Okay. Definitely. Yeah. Expedition Bigfoot was kind of what launched our podcast, because we looked at that crew and we were like, we could do that. We wouldn't be as good and certainly wouldn't be as popular, but we could do that. And so here we are. Well, Shetan, again, thank you very much for your time. We've really enjoyed talking to you, and again, you are one of the most knowledgeable people in this field I've ever run across. It just seems like the more I started to find out about you and the stuff that you've done and the stuff that you've talked about, the more I said, wow, every question I've ever had about a cryptid, she probably has an answer to it. And not just cryptids.
Well, I certainly try.
Yeah. But I someday you may hear me asking you questions about ghosts and gold mining and whatever else comes to mind, because it seems like you've been there and done that.
By selection.
Sounds good to me.
All right. Well, again, thank you very much. It's been a joy talking to you, and keep up the good work.
Thank you. You guys have a wonderful evening.
All right. You too.
You too.